Hey everybody, I'm going to take you through the creation of a modern culture design. Just a few things I want to say right up front because normally I'm recording in my booth and it has a professional mixer and professional audio headset that I wear and it sounds really, really good. So this is going to be slightly lesser level of quality, not quite hostage quality, but it won't sound as pristine as like my content I develop for LinkedIn Learning. So I just want to point that out. I apologize for that, but I'm really not an audio engineer. I actually had an audio engineer help me set up my booth so it sounds really good. This is just an old microphone I used to use for podcasting, and hopefully it's acceptable. Now, when I start on a design like this, and it's not that big. If I printed this out on 8.5 by 11, this is the design sitting on 8.5 by 11. So I build them pretty small. And you might wonder why. Well, it's just kind of what I started, and I just stuck with it. So the methodology remains consistent throughout all the art I'm creating. I'm now at, as of last night, 241. So this will be 242. The title of this one is going to be called Later. So I'm kind of playing off of that saying. I just noticed I had an extra. We don't need this open, so I'm just going to close it. So this is how I work. I have auto savior turned on, so that might kick in as we're recording this. It's okay. This is, and you can see I'm using 2019. I have 2021. If we go down here, I have that installed down here, and I use it on specific projects where I'm working in that version. I don't like mixing version files on any given project. It just makes it frustrating. So the reason why I'm using 2019 is because that's what I started in. I still find it, ironically, more stable than 2021. That's another big reason. So we're just going to build this, and I usually kind of tighten my sketch up or redraw it from a rough like this to a more finalized drawing where I really think out the shapes before I jump on the computer. But this is all geometric building, so it's very forgiving. So we're just going to lock that layer so we can't select it. And on the layer above it, we're going to start building. I usually use this tolerance of line here. And I just start off with discerning where the easiest shapes are to start with. And in this case, I'm going to start off with the head. So I'm going to create one rectangular shape. And by the way, when I'm creating this, I'm not doing running commentary, so it goes a lot faster. Most of these take me about 25, maybe 30 minutes. I've had a few that go a little longer just because I'm like watching Netflix and not completely paying attention to my art. So we'll see how long this takes. I'm going to also make a time lapse of this as well. So I'll just take this, in this case, just to form the basis of his head. I will do this. I'm going to go like this. I'm going to take this part, and I don't want it to be as high as the nostrils. I want it to be lesser there. And then I'm going to, let's see. I think I'm going to figure out how to pull off the inside of his mouth. Since we did that, I can't just inset that shape because it'll have this notch in it. So I'll just go ahead and figure out the width with the circle. And by the way, this is the reason why I use both the rounding tool in AI natively and the plugin by Astute Graphics called Dynamic Corners, because I can take a circle and it's smart enough to know that this could be a corner. So I can do that. I do that quite a bit, specifically for this series of artwork. I may go a little smaller. Like that. This sitting on the other shape, so I'm just going to minus front. That'll give me what I need there. Once again, we're going to go up here, and I'm going to create a scallop shape, once again, using dynamic corners to pull those out like this. Actually, before I do that, just to save a little time, I have a clone command, by the way. For 15 years, I used Illustrator. Believe it or not, I've been using, or for 15 years, I used freehand. And I've been using Illustrator longer than that now, almost 20, going on 20 years here pretty soon. So I'm going to make the inside there. They had a clone command in Illustrator, or once again, in freehand. And when I moved to Illustrator, I really missed it. So I created my own. And all it is an action that does Command C, Command F, and the command to bring to front. And I applied it to the F3 key. I use that quite a bit. So with this selected, I'm just going to hit F3. It runs all three of those commands, and it makes a clone. And so I use that quite a bit. Now, that's been part of my creative muscle memory for, man, going on 12, 13, maybe 14. No, wait. I've been using this 19, so at least 18 plus years I've been using that command. So that's why I set them up. I use them every day, all day long. I'll use it again here, and because these are essentially the same elements, just scaled up. So we'll do that for his eyes. I'll come back. I'm going to edit this inside pupil. Once again, why recreate the wheel when we can just clone this and move it over like that? And now I think this is at the point, because I use these shapes quite a bit. Actually, I don't think I have them anywhere else in this artwork. So I'm just going to, once again, this is the inner dialogue I have in my mind as I'm working. I'm not actually saying it. So we're going to fuse all these together. You can see we have most of the head kind of figured out. As I go along, I might sample this just so I can see everything with the same weight on it. Just makes it a little easier to view and make decisions. I'll go back to the Dynamic Corners tool. Here's a good example of using the native tool to round a square area like that. It's actually a little faster than the plugin. That's why I use both. The only thing is when Illustrator created this feature, even though if I go to my Pathfinder palette and I go to the Pathfinder options, even though I have smart or remove redundant points set, redundant points is when one piggybacks right on top of another. And so I can go to artwork. Let's go ahead and click on this, and I'll highlight this. This looks like 1 point, right? Well, in actuality, it's two, and they're piggybacking on one another. So for whatever reason, when Illustrator created the rounding tool, it creates redundant points. Even though Illustrator is set to remove them, it doesn't remove them all. So I just wanted to point that out because I didn't realize that until I started doing this series. And I used the rounding feature natively to Illustrator quite a bit to do that kind of rounding. And I discovered a problem one time when I was beefing up a line, and it was that problem. And I'm going, really? So it's kind of sloppy coding. They should know there's no reason people would want a redundant point there, and just be smart enough to remove it. But for whatever reason they left it. So whether or not they'll ever fix it, I kind of doubt it, since there's a snapping bug that's going on 10 years now. They still haven't fixed it, and I've shown it to them in person when I was in India, and it's still yet to be fixed. So there's that. So we're going to go here. I'm just going to draw a line. Let's go ahead and color that so you can see what I'm doing here. And the reason why I'm not zooming in is because I want to turn this into a time lapse, and sometimes I'll zoom in, but this, let's go ahead and zoom in. It's okay. So it's just that length, and then I'm just going to go, well, you can, in Illustrator, you can go to Object Path, and you can go Add Anchor Points, and it'll add, if I click this, it's going to add an anchor point, but I have to go back and do it multiple times. So I use the same functionality, but I do it via a plugin called Dynamic Corners, or I'm sorry, PathScribe, which is part of VectorScribe plugin. I'm going to click this, and it's going to say Add Points to Selected Segments. And on this, I want to add a certain amount of points. It defaults to 1. Well, here I want this to be kind of like this little mountain range, like the ridges on a alligator, crocodile, whatever. There's going to be 1 anchor point, 2 anchor points, 3. So we want to add 3, and it's going to figure out where to add those evenly across this path, and you can see it's added them. So now all I have to do is go like this, and then I just drag these up as high or as low as I want. I think that looks good. So I just did it on a line just so I could kind of isolate it, and you can compare it with the art. In reality, I would, let's go ahead and delete that, because in reality, I'd just select, with the direct selection tool, I'd select this path, and then I do the same thing. I go here, click on the menu, go add selected anchor points, 3, and I just do it to my the shape I already have built, and then just drag these anchors up like that. So that's the easiest way to do that. That way you get a continuity. You're not eyeballing it with the pen tool. It just makes the process go a lot faster. Now we're going to kind of do the same thing down here, but I'm going to draw a line like that. I might nudge it down 1 there. In here, we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 maybe. I think I'm going to try 10 first. So we'll go here, and we're going to try 10. And once again, you can see the preview. So you can just hit the preview, and maybe 1 less, maybe 9. I think that's going to be too big with 10, or too small with 10. I think that'll work. We'll click OK. And if it doesn't, we can go back. We're going to select every other one and then drag it up and snap it. Now keep in mind that this style I add a stroke on, so wherever it snaps to another stroke, there's going to be that even gap between everything. So that's kind of the aesthetic of this artwork. So we'll do that. I'm going to get a little lazy here. I'm going to clone this. Command C, Command F. I'm going to bring it down probably right about there. And then I think I'm going to get rid of these 2 on the end like that. So we just have a little, then I'll have the tail end on the other one, because this technically is the top part of his tail. Now I'll go back and I'll finish building out like his neck here. I do this quite a bit where I pull something out and then bring it back in. If you've ever had a problem with snapping, try that. That's kind of a workaround. It's really annoying. They updated CS6 back in the day to the first version of Creative Cloud, and they broke snapping, and they've never gone back to fix it. Highly annoying. So at times it acts as if there's no anchor point, no path when you're snapping, and that can get really, really frustrating. So I'm just going to build the rest of his tail here, the shapes that make up his tail, that is. And sometimes it's hard to gauge where this is, so I just usually draw it past where it needs to go, because I'm going to end up putting it here. And then I'll direct select this segment and snap it to the end of that, like that. Go like this, select these 2, and to weld these paths together, Command J, that joins these anchors. And on this one, his tail on a alligator like this kind of tapers. So I'm not going to make this a perfect 90 degree, and I'll kind of get that look. Now, I might go back, might look even better if I angle it like this. And then, yeah, I think that looks better. And we'll just keep building. It's amazing when you create this much art on a regular basis, your mind starts looking at everything you see during the day, and it tries to figure out, okay, how would you build how would you build that shape? It's kind of like a psychosis of sorts. Like on this one, if for example, when I round, this doesn't really align with my drawing. That's okay. My drawing wasn't perfect. But I might want this. I wish it was easier to do oblong rounded corners. There was a tool by, what's the plugin manufacturer? Sea Valley Software. Google them. Warning, they have like a web 1.0 version website. But they have a seriously cool rounding tool I used to use before Astute ever existed. And it did oblong rounding. And I kind of wish I still had that capability, because instead of having to do this and then go to a regular rounding tool, you could do this kind of oblong rounding, which was a really nice feature. Everything from Adobe to plugins now, everything's 90 degrees. It's a perfect kind of round on a corner like that, which looks fine, but sometimes you don't want that geometric precision. It'll look better if it's not geometrically based off a 90-degree corner is what I'm saying. I think I'm saying that right. So we'll keep going. I think the first thing, I think I'll build his back leg first, like this, and I'll figure out how deep. Go like this. Now this is where it gets a little odd, because I'm going to go like that and then go up here. The reason why this will make sense as you see me build it. Let's go ahead and snap this to the top of his tail. And we'll put this here. This is kind of an oblong round too. So in that case, I'd position it like that. And then I would round it like this. We're going to go ahead. I'm going to move this over so I can get access. We'll start the round, but I'm going to go ahead and move this back into position. And then I can go back to the rounding tool I'm using from Astute, Dynamic Corners, and pull that out. I think that's fine. I don't care if it doesn't match my drawing exactly. That looks pretty good. Here's another plugin by Astute called Subscribe. And I discovered this Arch by Points tool. I had this plugin for years, and then I bothered to actually go through each one of these and just play with it to see what it does. And I used to use this one 90% of the time. These hardly ever used. But this one, I tried it, and oh my gosh, this changed the way I build vector art. Because how would you create this? Well, let me show you how you'd create normally. You would just get your pen tool and you go click, click. We're using strokes in this case, so we go to the anchor point tool up here, and we would finesse it to get something like that. And that's fine. You can do that way. That's how you do it without a plugin. But watch how much faster it is with this Subscribe plugin and this specific tool, Arch by Points tool. You can tell an engineer name this. And somebody told me that CAD software has this kind of stuff in it for years, which makes sense because it's so much easier to just go click, find your next click, and just pull the curve, done. That's how easy it is. You don't have to touch Bezier curves. It's just really easy. So people, Astute Graphics just released a reform tool, which fundamentally improves the building of vector art. That's how great their plugins are. They just released that yesterday. And it's amazing how some people are stubborn, though, because, you know, Astute spent 2 years on it. 2 years. And that's a lot of investment of money and time to put together one tool. 2 years. And they released a plugin that, like, fat chance you'd ever see it from the Adobe team. Let's put it that way. It's absolutely cool. But so many people yesterday were getting all upset. Well, it's in a subscription. I don't want a subscription. And I'm like, have you done the math? I mean, seriously. I mean, the subscription's $120 a year, and you get access to all their plugins. I mean, is your time worth that investment? Because the amount of time it saves you to create, like on any given project, I'll save 2 hours of my time on any given project from beginning to end. My hourly rate for my studio is about $110. Right there covers my subscription for a little over a year. So it's a tax write-off. If you run your own business, you can write the plugin off because it's a tool you use for the context of your business. So why wouldn't you? I'm just a little surprised at times that people aren't that practical when they think about money or saving their time. I mean, my time's more valuable to me than $120. If it saves me hours and hours and hours, that's saving me a lot of money because I'm not wasting my time on something that shouldn't take so long. So just a little rant because I admire what they do and I think they should be supported. And they always get people like that. And, so anyway, I think they deserve what they charge because I'm going to rag on Adobe a little bit. Sorry, it's well deserved, seeing as they know there's a bug with the fundamental building of vector shapes in Illustrator. It's a snapping bug. And if I run into it when I'm building this, I'll call it out, but they know about it. They're well aware of it. Their engineers have told me, yes, we know that exists. And they said they're going to fix it, but so far they still haven't. Hopefully they'll, eventually get around to it. But it still hasn't been fixed. And that's a fundamental core feature of vector building that is problematic. And it shouldn't be in a professional app. I mean, it's like a car manufacturer releasing a car and saying, hey, the brake works most of the time. Well, that's not good enough. The brakes need to work all the time. And snapping in context of vector art, I would argue, is equivalent to the brakes. Because, like, for instance here, if I'm dragging this over, if I didn't have snapping to work, and I have smart guides turned on, Command U, then I'm just eyeballing it. What's the point of eyeballing if we're working digitally? It shouldn't be, nothing should be eyeballed. You should be able to have a precision vector building. And when snapping doesn't work, you don't have precision. Therefore, to me, that violates a main tenet of vector-based artwork. It's like, fix it already, and they haven't. Astute, on the other hand, they're so responsive. When I found that tool that I showed you when I built this detail down the foot, and I started using it, I showed them a design I was working on at the time. It was a snake, and I pretty much used that one tool to build all the artwork. But wherever, like, let's go back to that tool. So if I go here, and I click here, and I create this, let's say we're creating a football shape. And I click here then, and then I click here, and then I pull this out. It originally wouldn't fuse these corners together. I'd have to go back, highlight them, and go Command J. Because it wasn't designed to be used the way I was using it. But when I showed Astute that it could be used that way, you know what they did? Like within 2 days, they added that functionality of it auto closing an open path. And they also have the functionality, if you hold a key command, I forget what keyboard character it is, you hold it down, it'll snap to it, but it won't close it if you don't want it to. I mean, that's how they respond. They're super fast. They make things super intuitive, and it just works. It's never half-baked. That's the other thing that frustrates me with Adobe. They're always half-baking features. If you've ever used the Type Touch tool, it seemed useful when I first saw a preview of it. It seemed like, wow, that does look really useful. In practicality, it's not. So Okay, so we got kind of his front belly, and you can see here I brought this line right up from his leg. This had bent in a little bit, and so if you wanted to keep that, now that I'm looking at it, I thought I'd like it better if I didn't do that, but I think we're gonna kind of do a notch thing, and then I'll probably pull down that a little bit. And then I'm just going to go ahead and round that off. Yeah, okay, that does look better. So we'll do that. And so once again, Astute, really receptive to feedback, and they don't take a decade to correct something. Actually, it wasn't even a bug. It was just something I thought would make sense, and they agreed, and they did it like nearly immediately, which was pretty fabulous. You don't get that with Adobe, like, ever. Okay. Another thing that threw me off when I came to Illustrator from freehand is doing that kind of duplication here, so I get these even gaps. That's so much easier in freehand. I don't remember exactly how I used to do it in freehand now, since it's been 19 years since I used it, but I do remember when I moved over and I go, what? This is convoluted and like takes way too long. And I have so many people since Affinity came on the scene, why don't you switch to Affinity? Well, main reason, no agencies use Affinity, like none. That's the main reason. If it was just personal art I'm creating, yeah, I could use Affinity, but I need to be able to accept and receive native files from agencies I work with, and nobody's using Affinity. Okay, so I just copied that shape just to borrow this path since I had that curve on it. We'll do that. I'll round that off like this. And now I'm gonna figure this out. Because I have so many here, I'm just going to do a shape blend to get the 4 in between. By the way, here's a feature that Affinity doesn't have. They don't have shape blending. I'm sure there's other ways you can pull it off, maybe. I don't know. I don't use it, but you can't blend shapes. So that's one thing. Another thing that you can't do until I think they're now starting to develop it, so maybe eventually you'll get there, is offset. You couldn't do offsetting or insets on a given shape, but I think they're just now starting to develop that. Somebody told me that a while back. Okay, I think we just need to do the teeth and we can move on to the next phase. Once again, this, I don't know when I started. I wasn't paying attention to the clock, but this probably take me way longer than it normally does. So on these teeth, I don't want to create with the pin tool because I do want these to be, the tips to be perfectly centered. So I'll start off with a geometric shape, in this case a square, rotate it, and I'm just going to get the basis for the first tooth like that. Then I'll just pull this down. Now if I want this to be narrowed, we'll want to reset the bounding box since it's been rotated. By the way, some of you might not know how to do this. You just go reset bounding box like that. Or another way you can do it is you can just go, in this case, you can go unite. But what it's going to do is that'll close the path. So this will have another path put in here like that. So I usually just go to reset bounding box on something like that. And you could even create your own keyboard shortcut so you wouldn't have to go there and do this as well. And then if I think it's a little too wide, I'll just go ahead and transform it like that. We'll clone this, Command C, Command F. copy it over. I'll use the same one over here. I'm going to make another copy. We'll make a smaller tooth here. Maybe it's not as tall. Like that. A copy of that one, bring it over here, snap it. I'll take these three now. I'm going to clone them, and we'll just flip them, and then I'll snap them to the bottom side like that. Might go a little smaller on this guy. So I think that'll work. I do want an inside part of the mouth, so I'll put that line here. And I think we have everything needed to kind of move on to the next stage. The next stage is, well, actually, let me do some first. I'm going to select everything minus the blue, sample this outside line, just so everything's the same weight. So what I usually do at this point is I'll copy this, turn off these two layers. So I always save my build layer. I go to this layer, which labeled 200%, and I blow my artwork. Once again, I'm just repeating what I did on the very first one. I like the look, and I wanted to keep that continuity intact as I move forward. So blow this up. 200%. The blue is just to make sure it retained the square proportions, and it does. So we can go ahead and delete. We can actually delete this as well. Everything, his nostrils, these won't be strokes. These are going to be filled shapes, no stroke. Everything else will be stroke base. So we can select that minus his eyes, nostrils, etc. We're going to go to the stroke palette here, and the weight I use on the final form is 8 points. I usually round the corners here, and this is where I'll make any adjustments I think I need. And I can see a few things I'll need to adjust, but I'm going to go in on any line that terminates, such as the detail on his toes, here on his legs. And I'm going to go ahead and add a round cap on that. And now that I'm looking at his feet, I don't think I'm going to handle these this way. I'm going to make these just straight, kind of like that. I think it'll just look better. Move it over. I don't want this to get too close, like have these little pinched areas. I try to pay attention to that, so I give it some breathing room. Maybe even over a little more, like that. Clone this, and I'll move it over like that. I might even take this and clone all of these shapes, and then use this anchor to snap to the other foot so those toes are in the exact same position on the corresponding foot. Like that. You can see here where this is kind of coming down, and it's hitting lower than what this corner is, so you have this flat part. So these are the part, and here's a really cool plugin. You're not going to use it every day, but it's called Extend Path Tool. And so what I'm going to do just to showcase it is we're going to go and highlight the path. I'm going to drag a guide over here. So this is the vertical orientation of that path. And if I select this, notice this is here, and I want to extend this over to here. Well, to do that in Illustrator, you'd have to eyeball it. And here's a really cool plugin. It's called the Extend Path Tool. It just continues the geometry already established, and then I'll snap it there, and boom. I mean, how cool is that? It's like, that's why I love their plugins. They're super intuitive. In this case, it saves me time. I don't have to rebuild anything. I'm just going to select these two anchors, slide them up, and it kind of resolves that area, and it just looks nicer. coming to a point there. So that's the type of detailing I tend to pay attention to when I'm working in this style. We can get rid of this path. We're done like that. But kind of a cool tool, really helpful in some cases where you don't notice something when you're initially building it until later. You go, oh man, I should have done this or done that. And it really does help. So a great little tool there. Now, I always try to keep these rounded, but sometimes I'll go back and I'll change that, or I'll at least look at it. In this case, I kind of like having these square, and then I'll put a round in there myself. So instead of defaulting to a round, and this is where I wish on one path I could select just one anchor corner, in this case here, and just click on cap, and it would only apply that cap to here. So if I go here and I do that, it's not going to do that because this is a closed path, so that's not going to help us. If I do the round corner, it will round that, but it rounds every corner. I wish you could only apply it to a specific corner and it ignores all the other corners, and there's no way to do that. Once again, that would be really helpful because I do think this looks better in between the nose, that is, like that. So I just want to point that out. But so what I'm going to have to do is go back and create that little shape myself. And we're going to keep this because I'll go back and round off some of these details myself because I think it'll look better than using the round corner feature. So on his teeth, I think here I'm going to get larger with these, and I'll sample the outline here because I think that will look maybe over just a little. Oops, like that. Ignore all this, just look at the white space. Those are the elements I'm looking at. So in case of this one, I think this can actually go a little larger. Make sure we have the right weight line on it. These would all be 8 points as shown down here. Over here, we have this white being pinched because this white inside here is going to end up being the color of the inside of his mouth. So I don't like how it's pinching that. So we're going to go ahead and resolve both of these by just making these teeth smaller like this. Make sure this outline stays 8, otherwise it won't look correct. And now we have these nice gaps here, so that'll resolve that area. All this over here doesn't matter, although on this one I think I could get away with making this all the way up. Bring this over and snap it. That might work. I think I'll bump this one over. So these are the things nobody's ever going to notice. Nobody's even going to think about when they look at your final art. But as a creative person, specifically an illustrator, this is the design aspect of illustration. You have to pay attention to these things because the more areas that cause tension, even a little tension, the more areas of that you have within a given design, whether it's an illustration or in case of a logo specifically, that's what, if you ever wonder what makes art bad or good for that matter, well, I think one of them is the more visual tension you have in your art, the more degraded it is. The more degraded it is, the less effective it is, the less aesthetically pleasing it is. Thus, it leads to bad design. So pay attention to those details. We're going to add one more toe on this side. We're almost ready to expand this and start coloring, which is obviously the fun part. It's not like this one's going to be hard to color. Gee, it's a crocodile. What color should I make it? How about green? I think the nostrils need to be smaller. So, by the way, I'm kind of struggling at times to find, in this case, to find my align tool. There it is, because I have everything on one screen since I'm recording. And when I work, I use both screens. I keep a lot, my layers palette is on the screen that you can't see in this. That's my second monitor. So, okay, I think we have everything we need. And it's usually at this point, I always save my art at each stage in my build file for this series at least, because I can always go back and make edits later. So in this case, I'm going to duplicate this layer. And now that we have everything set in terms of the weight, in terms of balancing everything and adjusting detail, although I just noticed something. So I do this as well. So what we're going to do is, I don't like how that's there. So we're going to divide that like that. And I'm going to come down, snap it to this. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 2, 3, 4, 5, 26. Yes, I actually count when I use the nudge tool. Okay. And I have it set up for 1 increment equals 1 point. I work in points. That way I don't have to figure out weird math or whatever. So ooh, that's pretty close. It's kind of what I wanted. Oh, I'm just off. I got it pretty close though. So I think 1 on each would be fine. Some of you are going, really? You're that anal? Yes, I'm that anal. So we'll go 1 here. Move this one up. There. If you ever watched that TV show, one of my daughter's favorites, called Monk, it's kind of like when I work like this, I'm very obsessive compulsive with some of my decisions. Now, actually, on some things, it doesn't bother me so much, but on that, it's like, I just think this looks cleaner. That's why I'm doing it. Now, because I made a change, I'm going to make another duplicate, turn that off, so we have the original still we can go back to. And this is almost like, if you look at the layers palette, what this ends up becoming when I'm all said and done is kind of like an archaeological dig on vector art. I can show you where it began, how it evolved, how I made changes, and then in this case, we're going to expand the art. So I'll select everything. I'll go to Object, I'll go Path, and I'll go Outline Strokes. So it's turning all the strokes into shapes. Now I'm going to fuse these by going to Pathfinder Unite, like this. Now, remember that redundant point I showed you when we used the rounding corner feature in Illustrator natively? Well, when you do shape building like this, you're going to run into redundant points. You won't know it because these all look fine, but in all reality, if we go over to the plugin palette that I use called Vector Scribe for the Subscribe tool specifically, if this icon lights up, it means there's redundant points. And somewhere in this design, it's given us a warning saying we have redundant points. The whole design itself has 364 points, as stated here, made up of 42 paths. So we're going to click this, and it's going to remove any redundant point that's in our design. Once again, a redundant point is one anchor point piggybacking directly on top of another point. It should be smart enough to know we'd never want that, but an Adobe engineer told me one time when I asked him about this, well, that's because Illustrator's too precise. I was like, yeah, right, okay. So we're going to click this. So it's 364, click it, and there's only one redundant point, so that's not too bad. So sometimes it'll like remove 12 or 6 or whatever. So I always check that after I expand. Now that this is kind of cleaned up, we'll go back to compound. We'll go to release. You might have to ungroup it a few times like that. We're going to go ahead and deselect this outer shape and turn the inner shapes into a fill white. So it's sitting on this background shape like that. So little islands of white. I usually, now it changes to black. And then those inner areas, because if I go Command A, you can see the eyes, nostrils, those aren't showing up because those are white, sitting on white, or in this case, underneath white. So I'll select the head shape, the background shape, and I'll push it to back. And I have that set up as F4, which pushes those shapes to the back. Once again, these are keyboard shortcuts. So if I go up here and I go to range, it says send to back. You'd have to go up here, remember that it's command whatever. I never could remember the command, so I just made it an F4 key, and I've been using these these keyboard shortcuts for pretty much 18 plus years now. So it's muscle memory. I don't even think about it. So I'll select these two shapes. I'll select the eyes like that, just so you can see it. We'll color them here, unite them. Select the head and minus front. So now that's ready to go. All these background shapes, well, that's actually a tooth. This is a background shape we don't need. All these shapes in between here, this is technically background, so we can get rid of that. The one down here between his legs and above his tail, we'll get rid of these shapes like this. And for this style, right now it's an 8 points, but the final style, the outermost outline is a thicker outline. So we're going to go path, we're going to go offset path, and that's 20. We have 8 already, so we're going to add 12, offset at 12. Click OK. And you can see this, since this is a corner here, we're gonna do that again. I'm gonna set the offset to be a rounded offset instead of miter. You can preview it. That way you get this nice rounding, which I think looks better. Then I'll take this. I tend to save that. I just put it in one of the empty layers. And so this is the point where I consider this base black and white. I'll go to my layers. I'll make a copy of this one. So once again, we'll just copy it. I don't bother renaming the layers. If I was organizing it for a client or whatever, I go back and rename layers. But in this case, I'm not doing it for this series. So all this base art looks great, but what's really going to bring it to life is we're going to go ahead and round everything. So I'm going to go here and notice, remember we had this nice round here. So what I'm going to do here, so I'm just going to create, actually let's go ahead and color this black, because ultimately that's what it's going to be, like this. Once again, I'm doing all these things when I'm working on my own. I'm usually listening to an audiobook or kind of watching Netflix or something, but not paying a whole lot of attention. I just wanted to make sure it was the same level as that. So we'll take this, and all we're going to do is we're going to take this throwaway shape, select the head shape, and just minus front. And that gives us this part that we can go ahead and round now. So if I do this and I pull that out, we now have that rounded area. That's all I wanted to do. Now we're going to take the rounding tool that I use, Dynamic Corners tool, and I go into any area where it comes to a point and I'll add subtle rounds. So here we'll put subtle rounds. We'll do it in between these kind of, I don't know what they call it, ridges on a alligator. We'll round off these. And this is why I love the plugin, because on his eyes, these are bigger, so I'm going to make these a bigger round. Now that I have one, here's one reason why I use this over the native tool, is if I like this, I'll just go over here and apply it. It's that simple. And again, I'll apply it. And this plugin existed 6 years prior to Illustrator ripping it off and integrating it in a less intuitive way. To be completely honest, that's absolutely true. I think I'll put smaller ones on this guy. And we'll use that for the bottoms here. Just so it doesn't come to a dagger point, we'll put small little rounds on these, on the tips of all the teeth. Once again, is this something anybody's gonna notice? Probably not, but I think it looks good, so that's why I do it. And we'll just go and add little rounds, not on everything, but in this case around the teeth. I think it just looks better. Kind of like that. And we'll put this to give it a little shadow. And so that's all I'm going to do, is I'm just going to go in on all these areas. And a lot of my artwork I've been doing for this series, I've done time lapse, and you'll see this screen moving around where I'm doing this, and a lot of people go, well, what are you doing? Just going around, it's all black and white, I don't see what you're doing. Well, you can see how quick this goes just in real time, and it just goes lightning fast when you're watching a time lapse, so it's not very obvious what I'm doing in a time lapse. But this is what I do. I just go in and I just focus on, I just think this gives it more character rather than being so geometrically driven. It just makes it a little more custom, adding these type of rounds to it. Put a little round there. If you don't like a round it built, then I'll pull it out just to diminish that round, kind of like that. I'll reuse these same tolerances over here, so I'll apply the same rounding on these toes. This is another reason. The only way you could do this with the corner widget in Illustrator natively is you'd have to select all of these corners at the same time and do it at the same time. Or look at what you set one up and set a new one up and do it, and it just takes a lot longer. So a good example of Illustrator's implementation not being as intuitive as Astute's is. Not only that, at certain zoom ratios in Illustrator, you go to select an anchor point and you'll accidentally trigger the rounding feature in Illustrator, which so in that case, what I usually do if I'm building, I'll go ahead and hide the corner widget here in that menu, just because I ran into that all the time when they first introduced that feature. I'm going, God, this is annoying, and so I turned it off. And one reason why I'm still using 19 is not just because I find it more stable than 2021 or 2020 for that matter, is because I don't like how they changed guides in the new version of Illustrator. I find it more cumbersome and kind of annoying. I don't want things blinking on and off at me as I'm working. Just do what I tell you to do when I'm building and don't get in my way. And they've made it's like nobody was saying, hey Adobe, you know the guides, could you change 20 years of muscle memory and do something different with them? Nobody's asking for that. They'll make that change, but then they won't fix the snapping bug that makes building harder. It's really makes no sense. Most of their decisions are driven by a bunch of suits above them sitting in teams like the monetary marketing team for Adobe. Yes, that's an actual team at Adobe, and they make decisions like what feature can we remove so people will have to use Creative Cloud to do it instead. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding either. That's actually the type of decisions they do with that team. And I was told that by an Adobe person because I asked a question about an iPad app and they removed the feature of being able to email a PDF. And that's why, because that team decided it would cause people to use Creative Cloud more. So once I get to this point, I'll usually select all these shapes. I'm going to unite them like that. Then I'll immediately go back and I'll go compound path and I'll go release. I might have to reapply that, and now it's ready for coloring. I have some set colors that always load with my Illustrator file, so I usually jump to those immediately to see if it gives me everything I need. That might be a little too dark, maybe not quite so dark. And then maybe that looks pretty good. Might go a little darker on this one since it's underneath him. I think that looks good. I might do that on all of them. So again, in terms of coloring, this is probably one of the easiest ones since, you know, an alligator tends to be this color already. We have a nice pink color. I might go and lighten this, take some yellow out. By the way, I always work in CMYK because it kind of metaphorically kind of relates to a pigment-based coloring system. If you're mixing paint, how do you get green? Well, you take blue, yellow, green. It kind of works off of that same principle. And if I can get it looking great in CMYK, I know it's going to look great when I convert it to RGB. So there's that. So the inside color of the mouth, kind of really dark, muted pink. And I have some of these colors I use a lot, so I don't want to have to recreate the wheel every time. So I think this is looking pretty good. I think there's one more thing I'm going to do, and then we'll create a quick pattern. We'll call it good. So I'm going to zoom in on the eyes here. And the tolerance at this size, once again, is 8. So I'm going to go here and punch in 8 to get a circle. We're going to color it white. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to give the crocodile, I'm going to create a shape for no other reason than throwing it away. We'll clone that. I did that just so I could get the position of the highlight the same on the other side. We'll throw those away. And I think this is a case where crocodile eyes are larger in this context, so I think a highlight will work fine. Usually if the eyes are smaller, let's say they're as big as the nostrils, I wouldn't do it because that's like one of my design rules for this set is I can't violate the sizing. I can't violate that 8-point gap. It has to be, the continuity has to retain because all the artwork is built using that. And that's why when I gang them together, they work all as a family of sorts. I see one issue here is I think I'm going to just move this over kind of, actually, let's try something here. I'm going to do this. I'm going to snap it to that side and that side. Then I'll make it wider, select this, and align that bottom tooth to the center. That way I know these negative spaces are exactly the same. Once again, some of you are probably rolling your eyes going, really, dude? Well, it makes me feel good. What can I say? Okay. I think the inside of his mouth might get a little darker. So instead of getting super muddy, I'll add a little more red. Then I'll add maybe 5% more. We can preview it. That looks better. Like that. So I think our base art for this Modern Kulture design later is done. So I'll select all these inner shapes. I usually group and take the outline, group it with those. I'll make a copy of this layer like this. And now we're going to create the pattern. Patterns are really fun to create in Illustrator. Really simple for this type of thing. I reduce it 50%. I'll go ahead and ungroup it, take this outline. Since the background is going to be black, all we need to do here is turn this to an outline. We're going to inset it. We reduced it 50%, so if it goes from 20 to 10. Now we'll divide that distance and inset it by half, which is -5. And I'm going to use this inset line to register the gap in between all the art in the pattern. It's going to make sense. So let's go ahead and clone this, Command-C, Command-F. Then I'll rotate it 90 degrees, slide it over, find this inside path over here, snap it to that one. I'll take both of these now, clone it, Command-C, Command-F, rotate it 180, slide it down, take the inside path, and bring it up till it snaps there. So you can see we have that continuity of the spacing in between these elements, and I think this is going to work. Now, one thing I do test at this point is to make sure I don't have any any dynamic rounds still in my artwork, because the pattern tool does not like those. It'll crash Illustrator. I found that out a while back when I was starting these. So I'm going to select all this art, drag it into our color palette. It creates a pattern swatch. We're going to double click into this, which takes us to the pattern mode. We're going to go to the pattern tile tool, click on it. This is like a bounding box. So we're going to go ahead and snap it to this inner path, and you're going to see it's going to bring into that same tolerance everywhere. So now we have the gaps between all of our artwork is going to be the same. I'll select one of these. I'll go select same all, which I have applied to an Option F1 keyboard shortcut. That way I can just delete it. We have everything needed for our pattern. We can double click the background to get out. We'll turn on this layer, and we're going to build our final pattern and fill a shape. So let's go ahead and draw that like this. We don't need the outline. Get rid of the outline. We want this to be smaller, so let's go to Scale, click Transform Objects, click Preview. It's showing 50%. We want it a little larger. Let's try 65. That looks good. Click OK. We're going to go over to Rotate, double click, and we're going to rotate this about 17 degrees. Now we're going to go to the Appearance palette here. You can see we have the fill, which is the pattern. We're going to add another fill. It'll default to the pattern since that's the last fill we used, and we're going to fill it with black in the background. And that gives us our final tiling with the later Gator design. That's how you can simply create a pattern like this in Illustrator. So that's how I go about building all my Modern Kulture designs. I'm not sure what the timeline is on this. Not sure how long this took me, but normally I'm not talking and I'm going a lot faster. So hope you enjoyed this. I'll try to do a few more of these as I go along. But this guy will probably be posted. I have almost 3 months worth built that I haven't posted yet. So you probably won't see this guy until early September or late August. So hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.